Hey everyone, and welcome to RPG Horror Stories with D&D Doge. In today's video, we have a story about a disagreement during a Dungeons & Dragons game that gets so out of hand that the cops are called, and a story about a player's first time experiencing the bard stereotype. But before we get into those, here's Lucky to bless us against the psychic damage that these stories are sure to induce. Thanks, bud. Remind me to give you a treat later. But with that said, let's get right into the cringe. Cops Called on XDM by Reddit user PuzzleHeadedBed7070. Hello again, people of Reddit. I'm going to preface this story by stating that this is kind of less of a horror story in terms of anything in the actual game, but more in real life. Because of the game, so to speak. It's an odd one, but I think it'd be good to post it here so people can be careful and mindful. Names changed for obvious reasons. Alright, so this was back during the height of the 3.5 glory days. I was with a group of people where we met weekly, sometimes maybe even twice a week, or rather just 2 weekend days like Friday night and Saturday during the day, at the Dungeon Master's apartment. Let's call him Shrek. And let's call his wife Gruntilda. I'll just be me. The other players are mostly irrelevant to the story, except for my good buddy maybe. Let's call him Millhouse. So this story is kind of another warning about not having couples be on the opposite side of the DM screen, i.e. never have a player who is the significant other of the Dungeon Master. It basically never works out well, and there will always be bias and favoritism. This will be somewhat important later. Well, I would have to disagree with that. My game group consists of 2 significant others, with one being the Dungeon Master and another being a player. And believe me, the one that is a player does not get any special treatment. Now, I understand my situation is anecdotal, but in fairness, so is OP's. I forget which module we were doing at the time that things broke down. But anyway, Shrek was the DM, and Gruntilda was a player. Millhouse was playing an Orc Barbarian. I won't say what I was playing, alas that would very easily give away too much information, because of how uncommon it is. Gruntilda was playing an Elf Ranger, and the other players included a girl playing some type of Death Knight anti-paladin, something like that wanted or had a nightmare for a steed/mount, and a final guy who was playing a human bard. We did play for many months, heck, maybe it was even a year or 2, but there was always problems with Gruntilda being whiny, selfish, and throwing hissy fits when not getting her way. In this particular campaign, she wanted a black dragon for her animal companion as a ranger, a baby one, but still. Shrek, not wanting to upset his wife, decided to let her have it. Now, this is where the problem lies. I didn't mention this before, but we did play using minis and maps. I was kind of the one who actually had a good job, and so I bought basically all of the 3.5 books, and constantly bought those 3.5 Dungeons & Dragons miniature blind boxes, as well as some of the iconic figures, like the adult Black Dragon, the Orcus Demon figure, the adult Red Dragon, etc. Because transportation would have been annoying, and the idea of having everything just smashed into a Tupperware tub instead of placed neatly in their own places to keep them from getting damaged. Early on, after a month or 2 of playing with this group, I agreed to just keep all my stuff at Shrek's place. And this is the warning for all of you IRL in-person players. Never do this, unless you think you can trust your Dungeon Master with your life and your stuff. And even if you can, if they suddenly get married or such, get your stuff out ASAP. That meant all of my books, all of my miniatures, all of my dice, all of my map packs, etc. Several thousands of dollars worth of stuff. Probably even more, because many of those rare and epic figures were insanely valuable at the time, like the Strahd miniature, Champion of Elistre, evil wizard riding black dragon, pretty much any and all of the dragons themselves, etc. Well, one of my minis amongst all of the minis was the baby black dragon one, valued at the time at like $30 to $50 easy, because it was an epic rare, like 1 in 100 blind box kind of thing. And so, of course, upon wanting and getting the baby black dragon in the game, and that mini being used to represent it, Gruntilda goes, "This is mine now, I own this." To which I, an introverted collector, adamantly refused against. She then tried to be like, "I'll just give you $5 for it, that's fine, and then it's mine." Again, no, it's mine. It's part of my entire collection of Black Dragon figures, from baby up to the gargantuan one that was a purchasable standalone figure, which was also my favorite dragon type. So, of course, she throws a fit and kicks us all out of their place. Millhouse was the friend who got me into this group in the first place, and the one who tried to negotiate with Shrek and Gruntilda for a peaceful resolution to the situation. Because the ultimate fallout of things was that Gruntilda wanted me banned from their apartment and kicked out of their group, and being married to her, Shrek didn't really have a choice. However, when it was brought up about me getting back my stuff from their place, Gruntilda tried to go, "No, it's all ours now. I own it all, and you can't have it back." Credit where credit is due. Millhouse did all he could to try to reason with them, and Shrek probably did want to give it back initially, but had to go along with his wife, because if he even hinted at going against her, he'd probably never hear the end of it, and find himself kicked out too, even if it was his place technically. So, cue having to call the cops, having to have Millhouse witness that yes, it's my stuff. Thank God I am a pack rat who keeps all of their receipts and could show the cops that yes, I did indeed purchase all of the items, and that they were mine. And them basically telling Shrek and Gruntilda that they had to give me my stuff back, and that if any of it was damaged in any way, they'd have to pay for it. This would make certain Shrek didn't allow anything to happen to the books or minis at Gruntilda's hand, who was likely to throw another fit at finding out she couldn't keep my thousands of dollars worth of stuff, and that I would be coming to pick it up with a police escort that same day, and Gruntilda was not to be there when I did. I went with Millhouse to get my things, and Shrek even apologized about Gruntilda being such a B word, and that his hands were kind of tied. It didn't change that I had to call the cops for a resolution. Millhouse dropped out of the group as well, and being down to 3 out of 5 players, I'm sure the group disbanded. Well, the other girl moved away anyway, so they would have been down to just 2, one being Gruntilda. It took Millhouse and I a long time to find another game. It was an in-person game, but the new Dungeon Master had his own stuff, with minis too, and only said if we wanted to bring a mini of our own to represent our characters in the event that he didn't have one that fit, we could. Moral of the story, kids. Even if you're the Dungeon Master yourself, but you play at someone else's place, never leave your stuff anywhere. You never know what may or may not happen to it when it's out of your sight. Also, never have a couple play on the opposite sides of the table. If there's a husband and wife, they should both be players, or be co-DMs. Never one player and one DM. It always gets messy. Oh, one final thing. When I had sat down and went through all my stuff, it was hard to know what may or may not have been missing, even if I had a good memory for things. But you can guess which miniature wasn't in a lot of stuff. Yep, the baby black dragon. Gruntilda had apparently swiped it on her way out when Shrek forced her to leave and go to her mother's place so I could come collect my things. Millhouse managed to find a replacement for me, bless him. And if there's ever a chance that Gruntilda finds and reads this, I hope you choked on that mini. You owe me $50, and you owe Millhouse $50 for what he had to pay to replace it. That is all. Good night, Reddit. Wow. Sounds to me like Gruntilda has never heard the word no. And it sounds like Shrek just adheres to whatever she wants in game. And probably in life. Now, as I mentioned before, I wouldn't say that you should avoid couples playing D&D on opposite ends of the DM screen, though I can't say that there wouldn't be a chance that there would be favoritism. It just depends on the people, and Gruntilda is definitely one of those people. Demanding that she keeps one of OP's minis, to the point of kicking OP out and stating that all of OP's property is now hers, sounds like something a toddler would do while throwing a hissy fit. Just the fact that OP had to get the cops involved at all had to not only be embarrassing for OP, but for Shrek as well. Thankfully, it sounds like OP and their friend were able to get the stuff back, though albeit with a new Black Dragon mini, and found another group to play with eventually. Let's move on. But before we do, if you're enjoying the video, I hope you roll a crit on that like button, and if you're new here, consider subscribing. If not for me, then how about for some more kitties? I swear, they are best buds. But with that said, let's get to today's final story. The Bard opened with, "I Wanna Seduce Everyone," by Reddit user Who's Your Jedi. Since getting back into D&D in 2021, I've done Lost Mines of Phandelver twice, so when looking for new groups, I tend to skip ones doing that adventure, since it's a little old hat for me. However, while looking on Roll20 one day, I found someone who was running a twist on Lost Mines of Phandelver, where the player characters are members of the Cragmaw Goblins, looking to claim the power of the Forge of Spells for themselves. The game was pitched as being the chance to be little goblin chaos bastards, and that was an interesting enough twist for me to apply. I got in, rolled up a Hexblade, which I've never played before, and was cautiously optimistic. Game time came, and things immediately took a bad turn. While there were other players, the main people in this tale are me, a warlock with a cool weapon; Bard, buckle up kids; Artificer, Bard's husband; and the DM, a fellow victim in all of this. So we're starting character introductions, and when it's Bard's turn, the first words out of her mouth were, and I quote, "I want to seduce everyone." I'd heard about this type of Bard player before, but always found them so absurd that it was a little hard to believe that people actually acted like that. Well, now I'd had it dropped in my lap. I'd managed to never get COVID, but I failed to avoid this gaming absurdity. I mentally groaned and just hoped that this would not be too painful. That hope was quickly dashed as Bard suddenly got into an argument with one of her kids, and despite the DM and the other members of the party asking, would not shut off her mic. Oh, and one of those people was Artificer, who I will remind you was Bard's husband. And here we come to another of Bard's problem traits. She would not mute her mic when dealing with her kids, so we constantly had to listen to her argue with her oldest, who I guess was around 7, and the crying and babbling of her youngest, who I guess was 2 or 3. Not a session would go by without Bard having some drama with her kids, and a group of strangers on 3 different continents having front row seats to it. Artificer would try telling her to mute the mic, but that would only happen after at least a few minutes of us having to listen to screaming kids. Anyway, back to the horror of Session 1. We eventually get started, and the Dungeon Master explained our goblin tribe has Sildar Hallwinter prisoner. Bard jumped in and said that she wanted to bring him some food. The Dungeon Master basically went, sure, you bring him some food. If you know Horny Bard horror stories, you know what comes next. Yep, Bard wanted to seduce Sildar. With audible horror in his voice, the Dungeon Master had another goblin interrupt and tell the Bard she has a mission and to go meet with the rest of the party. I breathed a mental sigh of relief, because I did not sign up for some reverse Goblin Slayer game. If you know, you know. If you don't Google it. At that point, Bard went, and I quote, "Did I boom chicka wow wow with him?" The DM responded, no, he didn't understand what you were trying to do. Possibly as a way to give Bard a hint to knock it off. Though, surprise, it didn't work. We went off on a mission to find some missing goblins. In the nearby forest, we spotted an elderly goblin being chased by some giant birds and moved in to intercept. I'll spare you a long combat story, but it was quickly apparent that Bard was totally new to D&D and had no real idea of how to play. That's fine, we were all new ones. However, despite help from the rest of our party and her husband, Bard simply never learned to play her class. Even by session 6, she didn't understand how to use spells, or even that she couldn't attack enemies that she was several rooms away from. Anyway, we saved the elderly goblin, and Bard started to put the moves on him. I was pretty creeped out at this point. I reminded Bard that we had a mission, and that the party couldn't just camp for the night, as we'd just left our base, simply because she'd blown all of her spells in the fight with the birds. When even Artificer took my side, the Bard caved, and we got on with the mission. After the session, I immediately texted the DM and said, I gotta be upfront. I can't deal with a Bard trying to seduce everyone in sight. He promised to have a word with her, and to both their credit, Bard toned it down a little the following session. There, her antics were just throwing an orgy at the end of another mission. The Dungeon Master was clearly irritated, and all she got from him was basically, yeah, you're a hero of the tribe now. If you want to do that, there's others who will join in to get on your good side. I'll spare you a lot of the other nonsense, but keep in mind that screaming kids, and not learning anything about how to play their class, was a constant background to everything else. Anyway, at one point, we were talking with an NPC, and had managed to roll well enough that she was starting to share information with us. Though Bard suddenly decided to hit said NPC with vicious mockery because, quote, she doesn't like there being another girl around. I barely stopped myself from losing it there, but we managed to smooth things over, and the NPC agreed to help us, and would go on to be a great asset. Bard insisted on, and succeeded in, stealing from her before leaving though. Hop forward to our big dungeon crawl, and Bard was trying to navigate Roll20 from her phone, in the room where her toddler is sleeping. A toddler who, unsurprisingly, woke up and started crying because of having her nap time interrupted. This all led to both Bard and Artificer taking forever on their turns, because they're both trying to play on their phones and deal with their kids. At one point, Bard kept wanting to attack enemies several rooms away from where she was, and no amount of explanation as to why she couldn't would make her understand. When she was off dealing with her kids again, the Dungeon Master grumbled, she doesn't know what's going on. I'm pretty sure that was the final straw for the Dungeon Master. A few minutes later, we got a message from Bard that she was retiring her character. She later clarified that she enjoyed the game, but was going to have to drop out. I'm pretty sure the Dungeon Master just straight up kicked her out mid-dungeon, but I can't swear to it. Anyway, since Bard left, the game has been going well. Artificer is still in, and is honestly a cool guy who really pulls his weight in the group. And in complete fairness to Bard, when we were all just chatting, she was actually a very nice person. Just, as this story shows, not the best at reading the room, or D&D. So there it is, my horny Bard story. It certainly could have been worse, but it's not something I want a repeat of anytime soon. Thanks for reading. Now, is the Bard player doing the stereotype Bard thing to annoying levels a horror story? Of course. Even with the fact that Bard wouldn't take the time to understand the rules after 6 sessions is a bit much. But I think the true horror of the story is the fighting with the kids over the microphones during the sessions. Now, it is possible to have kids and still find time to play Dungeons & Dragons. In my campaign, one of the players has a 4-year-old, but during D&D nights, his wife watches her, I think the main problem here is that both parents wanted to play, and depending on the time of night, that's just a recipe for disaster. But that is all I have for you today. As always, I appreciate all of you, and may your games remain horror story free. Until next time.